May we make a suggestion? Take your phone off the hook. Somebody might call during the next hour or so and interrupt your fun.
Getting $10 million.
Bigger guests, bigger audio. You're listening to the West Coast Truth with Russell Scott, Season 4.
I promise you it's safety guaranteed by aeroplanes, by boats and tanks and bombs and guns. Well, it don't work too well, but you're too busy to complain. That's just the way it's always done. Just buy it.
I'm selling the book Maximize Immunity by Bruno Combi. Maximize Immunity can change your life. It can possibly even save your life. If you have AIDS or cancer, stop what you're doing right now. Get this book, Maximize Immunity, and learn how to maximize your immunity and unleash your body's best defense against illness. Your body can heal itself. Heal your body through the magic of food. Maximize Your Immunity, written by Bruno Combi, can save your life. I'm selling it for $20. Free shipping and handling anywhere in North America. Just send an email to editor.westcoasttruth@hotmail.com and put Maximize Immunity in the subject title.
On tonight's program, journalist, ufologist, and cryptozoologist, Nick Redfern.
Nick Redfern, welcome to the West Coast Truth.
Well, thanks, Russell.
Nick, for the audience who doesn't know who you are or isn't familiar with your research, tell us about yourself. Who is Nick Redfern?
Well, originally from England, lived just outside Dallas in Texas, and work as an author and journalist on pretty much all sorts of things. My background goes back to freelance writing, basically. Most of what I do in terms of day-to-day work in the writing field is just regular freelance stuff. I do a lot for UK website work, and I do a lot of feature writing for Penthouse magazine over here, music magazines, all sorts of stuff. So the paranormal stuff, actually, the writing is probably 30% of my daily work is sort of derived from paranormal or conspiracy themed work. But when I finished school, I began working on a entertainment magazine back in England called Zero, which covered things like fashion, music, entertainment, TV, rock music, all sorts of stuff. And I did that for a couple of years and found I enjoyed it, and then thought, well, why not try and... It was a 2-year contract job, so, it just folded after the 2 years. But I thought, well, why not try and pursue this further as a career outside of just like a regular thing and try and, become self-employed and make it as a writer. Now, that's what I do to this day. But I mean, the reason why, I diversify so much is because freelance writing, isn't the safest of jobs at the best of times, so you have to, it's like any job when you're self-employed, you go where the work is. You don't just focus on the work you want to do, you have to go with what's there. So, that's sort of basically my background in terms of working. Now, how I got interested in sort of paranormal things, conspiracies, my father was in the British Royal Air Force. He worked on radar, and he was involved in several UFO incidents. This is back in the 50s, where the radar personnel, he was a radar mechanic, but the radar trackers were picking up these high-flying, fast-moving objects approaching the East English coastline. And the first thought was, well, it's got to be the Russians launching a sneak attack. But the speed, the height, everything else clearly suggested that wasn't the case. So aircraft were scrambled to try and intercept them. The pilots reported seeing these strange lights rather than like a clearly delineated aircraft or whatever. And these strange lights, whatever they were, they sort of played games of cat and mouse with the aircraft to the point where they had to return to base. And this occurred over the course of 3 nights. And at the end of it all, everybody involved, the pilots, the ground crews, the radar people, were taken into a room and were told, you signed the British government's Official Secrets Act, you won't talk about this. And, my dad didn't tell me until I was like, probably about 13, something like that, when he told me this story. This was sort of decades later, actually. And not just because it was my own dad, but because, it was he was trained in the military to work on radar. It sort of really made me see that, wow, that UFOs are real, they do exist, and there's sort of a substantial body of information going into governments, but possibly not much coming out the other end, for us to see, or aside from a few snippets here and there. And so, I thought, well, I've got this background in journalism and writing. Why not try and combine that with the interest in conspiracies, UFOs, and other aspects of the paranormal I was interested in? And so that's what I decided to do, and use that as the thrust for getting into, this sort of field, if you like.
Doing what you love.
Well, yeah, and I think, in life, that's important. Any sort of job, in this day and age, sometimes you just have to go where the work is, no matter what you do. But I think the ideal thing is to do something you enjoy, because for the most part, you're going to be doing it for a minimum of like 40 years, So there's no sense, unless you can avoid it, which, unfortunately a lot of people can't. If you can avoid doing something that you just have to do, but you do something because, well, you have to do it as well to live, but you want to do it as well, that's all the better. And, I always say to people that, if you've got a goal, a dream, whatever, pursue it. Sometimes, I'll be the first to admit, freelance writing can be a really sort of tough gig. It's not, some people think, all luxury and dollars and everything else. You do it because you have a passion for it, and you accommodate your lifestyle based around the fact that, sometimes it is a struggle. So, but again, I wouldn't change things, because I don't want to spend 40 years doing something I hate and regretting things. I'd rather do what I enjoy and, take on board whatever comes along with that. So.
Where do you get your information from?
Sort of having a background in just regular journalism, which is mainly what I still do. I sort of apply the same techniques to doing UFO research or Bigfoot or whatever, in the same way that I would if I was sort of covering a regular news story for, a local newspaper. Let's say, I don't know, a truck's tipped over on the highway and there's, 10 cars involved and people have been killed or whatever. You go out, you speak to the people who were there, witnesses, you get statements from the police or whatever. And that's the sort of thing I do in this sort of field. If I'm pursuing a story and I've got snippets of data and perhaps a few files through the Freedom of Information Act and there are people named and it's not that long ago, well, you try and track them down. If you track them down, you phone them up and say, are you willing to speak about this? And if they say yes, and they give you another name, well, then you phone that person. I use the Freedom of Information Act, as I said, a lot as well, to get hold of government files. And it's one of these situations, like in any journalistic approach to a story, it's not going to come to you. And it's no good being of sort of the mindset of, oh, is that person going to be angry with me if I phone them up? That you're never going to get stories living your life like that. You've got to aggressively pursue a story, be, dogged about it. If you get pushed back, well, try and find another way in through another doorway.
So you're not just merely Googling it.
No.
You're doing some hardcore investigation here.
Yeah, that, as I said, my background was in journalism before it was in paranormal writing. Now, and that's why I apply the same techniques if I'm doing a story. Say, for example, on a book, if I'm writing a book and I do a chapter Monday and Tuesday, Wednesday I might be doing an article for Penthouse, who I do a lot of work for. So with them, it's a case of if they commission a story about an author who's got a new, paranormal sex book out or something, which is the sort of thing I've done for them. Well, they'll get me to phone that person up. We do a good full interview. Then I get quotes from other people, and a few quotes from the publishing company or whatever, and you make a feature out of it. And so I apply those techniques when I'm doing the books or whatever, because there's no reason not to do that, and there's actually every advantage to doing that, because that's how you get a story. A story, unless you're really lucky, no one is going to give you the entire story that you're looking for. Invariably, it's going to have 3 or 4 strands, or countless witnesses or people involved in different aspects over the years. So it's a case of you've just got to go out and pursue it. The main thing I use the internet for is sort of getting background data on organizations and places and history and things like that, and tracking people down, be trying to find a person, like name searches, that sort of thing. There are different resources you can subscribe to that, to where you can get names of people pretty much here, there and everywhere, that goes far beyond, just Google search or whatever. So I use the internet quite a lot for that. But I mean, the internet's only going to tell you so much. It's not going to get you the answers on a hard, deep secret that's been hidden and still is hidden. That is when you've got to go out and look for it.
But how can these things remain a secret? It's hard to keep a secret. People like to spread gossip. People can't keep their mouths shut.
Well, it's like Roswell. People say, well, how is the secret being kept? Well, it hasn't. Everybody knows the Roswell story. The big difference is it's not that the secret hasn't been kept. For the most part, the secret hasn't been believed. Outside of the UFO community, there's not a single person at any main media outlet, whether TV, newspapers, magazines, internet, you say, what's Roswell? Each and every one of those investigative journalists will know what Roswell implies. Oh, a UFO crash in the New Mexico desert back in the 40s. Everybody knows that story. But nobody touches the story in the media. And I don't honestly believe there's some big conspiracy to prevent the media finding the truth out about Roswell. What I think is that largely the media laughs at the subject and they don't want to deal with it. So in other words, secrets can be hidden when, ironically, nobody's looking for them. That's the thing, people assume that with something like Roswell, well, the secret can't be kept because everybody's looking into it. Well, no, they're not. You have, a few dozen UFO researchers who are looking into it, unlimited resources, limited budgets, and with the case being 65 years old now and pretty much everybody dead. It's not like you've got Fox News or the New York Times, major outlets with huge budgets who could, potentially, apply 3 or 4, a team, 3 or 4 people for 12 months to just pursue every lead. That might crack it. It really might. But nobody's doing that. So when it comes to conspiracies and secrets, they can be easily hidden when hardly anybody's looking for them, even if they know the story. People just aren't going out there. They're looking for the regular sort of secrets, Clinton in the White House with Monica Lewinsky or whatever, because that's sort of perceived as being real, down to earth. It's a viable, credible news story. So journalists actively pursue it. But most journalists just don't want to be known as the guy who chases little green men. So they focus on the economy or crime or whatever, So that's, in my view, why the secrets can be so well hidden. They're actually hidden in plain sight because nobody's looking for them.
So it's the 50s. Your father spots a UFO on the radar. Little green men. Is it the government or little green men?
Well, when people ask me, what are UFOs? And I always sort of say, well, it depends which UFOs you're talking about. I mean, certainly if you go back to the 40s and the 50s, there are a lot of highly credible reports from that era of UFOs performing all sorts of weird acrobatics in the sky, which seemed far in advance than anything that we were flying back then. And if that was the case, well, why didn't we just, show it to the Russians and scare the living daylights out of them? Say, we haven't just got fighters or bombers. This is what we've also got. That could have knocked them back, however far. It could have changed the face of the planet. But that didn't happen. You know, it was like, well, yeah, fighters and bombers are the best we've got. So I do think there is good evidence in the 40s and 50s, at least, that some UFOs were, quote, somebody else's, not from around here. Now, today, I'll be the very first to admit that the more that our technology advances, the more and more it's becoming difficult to differentiate between what might be a genuine UFO and what might be something on the military's secret list still that's being test flown. You know, there's no doubt that the military agencies of numerous nations now are flying all sorts, or test flying all sorts of weird prototype and strange-looking aircraft. I mean, you only have to look at things like, you know, these unmanned aerial vehicles that, you know, we saw more in the Middle East and that are becoming increasingly seen in domestic skies as well. You know, some of these look really weird. And we do know that in the past, when the stealth fighter and the stealth bomber, you know, these weird-looking black triangular-shaped aircraft were in the test stages, when people occasionally and inadvertently saw them, the military actually started spreading in the little towns where they might have been seen UFO stories, because the UFO angle was acting as a good cover to cover up military activity. Mm-hmm. And I think the government agencies, I think, actually do realize there's a genuine UFO phenomenon, but they also realize it's a phenomenon they can exploit to cover their activities as well, which sort of gets into sort of really confusing areas, you know, when you have overlaps and different agendas and, you know, using the UFO subject not just to keep it hidden, but to create fake stories to hide, you know, the flight of your latest UAV behind or whatever.
There have been an amazing number of UFO sightings lately. What should you look for if you're looking at the sky?
Well, I mean, you know, when these things began to be seen in the late 40s, you know, everybody was talking about flying saucers because these things were saucer-shaped and they were flying. But today, ironically, you actually don't see, not for years, you know, we had reports of sort of the classic 1940s and 50s flying saucers. People are talking more about things that sort of look like next-generation stealth aircraft, like large black triangular-shaped things, you know, but bigger than the stealth fighter and the stealth bomber and flying in silence. I mean, the key sort of characteristics, though, that I would suggest to people to look out for, or, you know, if you see something weird, and the things to remember is if the vehicle has the ability to sort of hover in midair, you know, and you don't see sort of rotors like you would on a helicopter. You know, a helicopter can hover in midair, obviously. But if you see something that is flying, then it stops, and there's no evidence of rotor blades, well, that's something significant to look out for. You know, sort of abrupt left and right-hand turns, that kind of thing, flying in silence. If it's nighttime and you know, it's not like the regular red, green, and white lights that you see on like an airliner or whatever, you know, it's sort of just totally abnormal colors in a weird pattern. That's something to keep, you know, mindful as well. And of course, you know, the most important thing, the shape. You know, if it's not a fuselage and wings, then it's not a helicopter. Well, what is it? But as I said, you know, going back into today's world, I would be, even me, you know, I would be looking at the idea of things like remotely piloted vehicles, unmanned aerial vehicles, that sort of thing first in today's world than I would aliens. You know, I think there's far more of a tendency today to see governments turning these sort of vehicles on their own people to spy on them, rather than it being bug-eyed aliens coming to abduct people.
You sort of touched on levitation there with there being no sound. I'm assuming that's what that would be from, right?
Well, yeah, I mean, that's the thing. I mean, you know, clearly, if some UFOs are from somewhere else, then these beings, entities, whatever you want to call them, have obviously developed technology that eludes us. You know, we can go to the planets, but, you know, it takes years. You know, it takes the average spacecraft years to leave our solar system. That's how vast it is. And never mind get to the next, you know, the next star system. So if somebody has achieved sort of, you know, interstellar spaceflight, they've clearly developed a technology that far exceeds anything we're flying today. So in that respect, we would have to be looking at something highly radical and advanced. Now, what that would be, that's a big question. But clearly, to put it in perspective, the nearest star to us is 4.2 light years away. That means if you travel at the speed of light, it would take you 4.2 years to get there. The speed of light is 186,000 miles every second. So to get from here to the nearest star, you would have to travel 186,000 miles every second for 4.2 years. That's how far away the nearest star is. So that really kind of puts it in perspective of the sort of technology you would need to apply to get from point A to point B.
But maybe this has all happened before. Maybe we've had this technology. And
well, this is it. I mean, there are some people who believe that while there's a very real UFO phenomenon, there are people who believe the entire sort of alien angle is almost like a meme or a mythology to hide behind nothing but classified military programs, that there never has been a real alien angle to it, that it has all been like a charade. And, there actually only is really one thing that for me points in another direction for some reports, and that is if you've got all this advanced technology and you have enemies all around the planet, well, why not just show them what you've got and have them quaking in their boots? Why have all this for 60 years, never use it on the battlefield, never present it, and actually claim, if you're going to say it's aliens, actually claim it's nothing to do with us or it doesn't even exist?
Yeah, but countries, you get nuclear technology, but you don't drop the bomb.
No, but you tell the enemy that you've got it. Of course. And they better watch out. But that's the thing. The Americans or the British or the Russians aren't saying, look what we've got. This eclipses the atomic bomb.
Well, the Russians did,
one
actually.
move.
The Russians did. The cabinet minister came out and said that they have weapons that can destroy entire nations.
Well, atomic bombs can do that,
That's true. We got to take a break.
That's the thing. Yeah. Okay.
We got to take a break, Nick. So we'll be back in 2 minutes with today's guest, Nick Redfern.
Are you living in pain or discomfort? Have you found that pharmaceuticals are doing more harm than good? MedPot Now provides an alternative solution to achieve a higher quality of life with the highest grade medical cannabis in the industry. All of our products are non-profit, chemical-free, and organically grown. Nice. Call 604-569-2119 or visit www.medpotnow.com. MedPot Now. The freedom to choose what works is finally in your hands.
Sophisticated, aerodynamic, incredibly powerful, yet responsive lightweight handling, and with features others simply don't offer. Introducing the new Auric XL Platinum 9-pound upright. The power to go from zero to clean in minutes. Go online to buy or find an Auric dealer near you and find out how you can test drive the XL Platinum risk-free for 30 days.
Experience instant relief with the UN Method. The UN Method is an innovative hands-off energetic technique that blends ancient Chinese temple healing and quantum biophysics with Western alternative modalities. Learn how to access the creative solutions provided by your intuition. For more information on upcoming classes, call Colette Stefan at 1306-584-9135 or visit www.crystallinevision.com.
We're back with Nick Redfern. Nick, you've written a book. Oh man, you've written a lot of books actually. But this one is The Pyramids and the Pentagon. I have it in my hands. A great read. What the hell do the pyramids and the Pentagon have to do with each other?
Well, that's a good question. It's not sort of the type of area you would imagine there'd be much crossover. No. But the more you look into it, you actually find, ironically, that there is a lot of crossover. Government agencies, the one thing about them, with is that their governments have large budgets. So, throwing $3-4 million here or there is neither here nor there. It's one of these things where projects and programs and think tanks are opened sometimes into sort of the most weird areas you could imagine. And that's certainly the case with this particular book I've just written, The Pyramids of the Pentagon, which looks at how, since the late 1940s, various agencies of the US government and also the British and German government, or the Nazis, I should say, during the Second World War, have investigated things like mystical relics, ancient civilizations, claims of ancient astronauts visiting the Earth, that sort of thing. And it's clear to me, at least, that, again, the reason for this, it's not to sort of further our knowledge of history or archaeology. I mean, that's not the government's business, to tell us what, was going on in the past from an archaeological perspective. It seems to be the case that all the things they were looking at seem to exhibit, even if it was in sort of like a distorted folkloric fashion, but it seemed to describe advanced technologies existing in the distant past. And that being the case, I think they were sort of pursuing the idea of trying to understand and capitalize on these ancient technologies and try and use them in weaponized form in the present and the future. So sort of weaponizing the past for the modern era. The fact that it was all to do with archaeology, was here nor there in one respect. The government, I don't think, was interested in, trying to find out the lineage of the pharaohs or whatever. But if the pharaohs had access to some technologies we've forgotten about or lost, that was of interest to them.
So the book deals with several different topics. The pyramids, the Pentagon, being two of them.
Yeah, I mean, one of the weirder ones is the CIA search for Noah's Ark.
I was just going to bring that up. That's incredible stuff.
Yeah, I mean, that's a very weird saga. What happened was it all began in 1949 when a U.S. Air Force spy plane was flying on a mission over Turkey towards the borders with the former Soviet Union. And, this 1949, the Russians were the next threat after the Second World War was over. And because this military base that the Russians were building was quite close to the border with Turkey, Turkey being our friend, this spy plane went up to try and, fly over at a high level, but get high-resolution photographic imagery of this base and try and determine what was going on there and what was going to be placed there. And the crew actually had to fly past or near Mount Ararat, which is supposedly the final resting place of Noah's Ark, as it's told in the Bible. And so they used Mount Ararat as a marker to get to where they were going. Well, as they sort of climbed past the peak of Mount Ararat, which is very, very high and permanently snow-capped and ice-capped all year round, what happened was that one of the guys on board the plane, this was like a bomber with a sort of a crew of 4 or 5, said that he could see this huge, what looked like a wing-type structure sticking out the ice. But it was like no normal wing because it was about 300 feet long. And they saw another one only a very short distance from that one. So what happened was that the pilot quickly swung the aircraft around to the point where they were able to sort of shoot off 5 or 6 photographs of each one. And then they carried on with their assigned mission, returned to base, explained what had happened, and the photographs disappeared inevitably into the Pentagon, although some of them have since surfaced through the Freedom of Information Act, but certainly not all of them by any means. Mm-hmm. And of course, the fact that whether people believe the stories or not, pretty much everybody knows the Mount Ararat Noah's Ark story. So what happened was the pictures went into the Pentagon. They were shared with people from the CIA's Office of Science and Technology, and also with various other agencies to try and determine what the picture showed. Well, they weren't sure, they couldn't tell, so they flew other spy plane missions, and then in the 60s and 70s, spy satellite missions over Turkey, because the Turkish government were quite reluctant to allow people to go up to the top of the mountain, and they still are to this day, actually. So
does Google Earth have it on there?
Yeah, I mean, you can Google Earth it, or if you go to Wikipedia and type in Ararat anomaly, that's the Pentagon never called it Noah's Ark. They called it the Ararat anomaly. But if you go to Wikipedia, just type in Ararat anomaly, you'll see one of the photographs. The picture they show there is one that's been declassified through the Freedom of Information Act by the Defense Intelligence Agency. They specifically released that one. And, for years they sort of pondered on, well, what is this thing? There were some people who thought it really was Noah's Ark, Other people wondered because it actually looked nothing like an ark, or the pieces they could see, they looked more like wings. There was even speculation, could it have been some sort of ancient space ark, if you like, from some other world, kind of like an ancient equivalent of Roswell, something slamming into the ground thousands of years ago. And of course, again, it's clear from what we know that no government agency is going to expend millions of dollars and use spy satellites just to find an old boat, even if they thought it was an old boat. That's not the government's role. There's no reason for them to do that. But if they thought there was some sort of technology involved, then it all makes sense. When it's the military and the CIA's scientific and technical people, clearly they're looking to try and determine if there's some advantage or other to be gained. Now, I use the Freedom of Information Act quite a bit to get files on this, and there's no doubt from the files, that they were heavily looking into all this. But there are also unofficial stories about supposedly like military teams going into the area and finding this sort of like huge metallic shell, if you like, not sort of, a spacecraft packed with machines or whatever, but like a very ancient rusted shell of something that clearly wasn't a boat, but nobody seemed to know what it was, and there was just no way to move it, obviously, it was sort of packed in the ice, but there it was, they could see it. So again, I think if these stories are true, it all points to something weird, but, the passage of time, the fact of it being sort of just permanently locked in ice, literally every day of every year, its inaccessibility, even the government to that extent, I think is limited, but the mere fact that now we have these files through the Freedom of Information Act, I think is a good pointer that, they were after something up there, and it wasn't just an old boat.
Okay, so you've got the Noah's Ark, but there's also the Ark of the Covenant, and the Ark of the Covenant is not a boat.
No. Well, the Ark of the Covenant, yeah, that's basically this sort of mysterious chest. And it was basically, and when you read the stories, I mean, it sounds like it was sort of like a communication device with God, something like that. But reportedly, the Ark of the Covenant possessed sort of very strange and deadly powers. Like if people got too close to it, they would just drop down dead. And when you hear some of the or read the translations and the implications, it sounds kind of like as if it operated on electricity, and the whole issue of people dying or whatever was due to them possibly getting a violent electric shock through not being grounded in the vicinity of whatever the Ark of the Covenant was. But it doesn't sound like some magical device. It sounds like a piece of technology that used like an ancient electricity in it somehow. Supposedly it had the power to knock down walls and hold water back, as if it was almost like gravity defying as well. And of course we can never really know for sure, I mean, how much of this is mythology and folklore and how much is fact.
This is in the Raiders of the Lost Ark, right?
Yeah, I mean, Raiders of the Lost Ark, the movie with Harrison Ford, the Indiana Jones film, that tells the story in a fictional format of the Nazis looking for the Ark of the Covenant, purely again because of its potential military capital. But we know that the CIA was heavily interested in the real world in the Ark of the Covenant, and again, if it was just described in the Bible as like an old chest or whatever, there'd be no interest. But when you've got some sort of device which, even in biblical terms, talk about it, having the ability to move water, to not electrocute people, but to kill people if they got too close. I mean, the Bible actually talks about, God supposedly warning people not to get close to the Ark or not to touch it. It's kind of, it does sound like, we're talking about some sort of dangerous electric device that could kill people.
Mm-hmm.
And again, if somebody was building something like that thousands of years ago, you are going to wonder, well, what was it? Was it something really advanced, technology speaking? And if so, let's go and find it, or look for it at least. And that would seem to, I think, be the impetus for the CIA's interest, the potential of finding some sort of priceless ancient treasure, kind of the equivalent of finding a 747 under the sands of Egypt or something.
Isn't it the Ethiopia that claims to have it?
Well, yeah, I mean, this is one of the problems, it's like one of the problems facing government agencies is not just the fact that...
Or is that just a tourism thing? Come see the archeology.
I mean, there is a story that, there's actually a lot of credible stories that it's supposedly hidden somewhere in Ethiopia.
Mm-hmm.
But somewhere in the region of 7 or other 8 places have been suggested as well. And, of course, on top of that, when you have such a passage of time of thousands of years, you're not sure where it is, access to it might be hidden by people who are sort of jealously guarding it, then even for governments with all their power, it becomes very, very difficult, number one, to hide what you're up to, and number two, how do you track down something that vanished 2,000 years ago when you've just got legends to go on as to where it finished up? So I think in some of these cases where we have evidence that the government was interested, I wouldn't be at all surprised if they didn't hit a brick wall, because, even they, have their limits as well.
Has the government ever searched for the Holy Grail? That's not mentioned in this book, I don't believe. But
no, it isn't. I mean, there are rumors that the Nazis did that. The Nazis were sort of I guess the people who sort of kicked off this search in the Second World War, for ancient artifacts, where like the Spear of Destiny, the Ark of the Covenant, again with a view to, sort of using their powers against Allied forces. So, it wouldn't surprise me, if you got something like the Holy Grail. I mean, when you look at everything else that they were looking for, it would make sense. And, I'll be the first to admit that even though, I uncovered a lot of material for the book,
mm-hmm.
I wouldn't be at all surprised if there aren't, a whole range of other artifacts that, that we were being looked for, that maybe they found something, maybe they didn't. But, it would be illogical just to focus on one or two when there's, a handful of others as well.
Well, I'm really curious on this levitation thing.
Yeah, that's a weird one because, all around the world, whether it's England with Stonehenge, where I'm originally from, or pyramids in Egypt, ancient Rome, ancient Greece, Central America, South America, one thing that unites all these places is that they all show evidence of massive creations using gigantic blocks of stone that baffle people to this day as to how they got put into place and on top of each other, 30 feet in the air or whatever.
Well, do you have some information on that stuff?
Yeah, I mean...
Okay, well, let's talk about it after the break. Nick, can be back in 2 minutes.
Hi.
I can save you 15% today if you open up a charge card account with us.
Identity thieves never stop coming up with ways to steal from you. They can open up an account in your name and go on a serious spending spree.
Do you have cufflinks? Mm-hmm. Gold ones?
Not on our watch. We're LifeLock. Go to lifelock.com and learn how our patented billion-point database can help protect you. Call 1-800-LifeLock today. LifeLock. Relentlessly protecting your identity.
It's official. Green Construction has the lowest installation price on flooring in the greater Vancouver area. Transform your home or office from only $1 per square foot. At Green Construction, we guarantee our workmanship for life, and you don't pay a dime until the job is complete. Call 604-345-7626. That's 604-345-7626. Green Construction. Going green has never been easier.
At cafepress.com, find or make exactly what you want to put the you back in unique. Go to cafepress.com, pick a tea, hoodie, water bottle, or any product. Express yourself, who you are, who you want to be, what you believe in, what he believes in, who you like, who you really like. Make a statement with the perfect, unique holiday gift. T-shirts start at just $9. CafePress.com. Find stuff, make stuff automagically.
We're back with Nick Redfern. Let's talk about levitation. And is this how the pyramids were built? They just thought about it and put that thing right there?
Yeah, I mean, if you look back into history, contrary to what people believe today, that it was all done with rollers and ropes and manpower, you can go back to Rome, Greece, Central America, South America, England, Egypt. All these cultures have legends and stories about the stones being lifted by, back then what they would call like magical powers. And what's interesting is that many of them talk about the stones either being lifted by music or singing or musical instruments. But now that's literally, that's not the case. It sounds crazy. But what they're talking about is you lifting the stones via the use of acoustics. Now, the military today is researching this area very deeply. The idea of using like directed energy, acoustic energy technologies to where you can actually use directed energies from different directions and raise small objects. You keep them in place by the sort of the effect of the acoustic energy, hitting them, that sort of vibration you feel at like a rock concert, where you can amplify and direct that and actually raise small objects within it. And the military's looking at that application, again, from a weaponized perspective. But when you go back and you look at a lot of these stories, from ancient Rome and Greece, where, the gods would raise the stones for the music of like a, particular instrument, things like that, it's clear that, we're seeing a pattern all around the world. And some of these stones are huge. I mean, the heaviest is actually a place called Baalbek in the Middle East. That weighs just in at 1,000 tons. Today we cannot move that stone, and yet somebody carved it and built it. But if you had a technology that would allow you to sort of kind of gently push it along, like a little boat on the water, even if 3 feet in the air, that would be a totally different scenario. Now, what's even more interesting is that in the 50s and 60s, a number of UFO and paranormal researchers began to pick up on this issue and began researching it. One of them was a guy named Maurice Jessup, who wrote a book called The Case for the UFO that addressed this whole issue of the pyramids being built by levitation. And another one was a guy named Bruce Caffey, a New Zealand airline pilot, who wrote a book called Harmonic 33, which followed a similar scenario of these ancient structures being built with some sort of levitation. What's interesting is that both Bruce Caffey and Maurice Jessup were watched very, very closely by elements of the US military who opened files on both men. So, we're clearly seeing evidence that the government was not just investigating these ancient mysteries, but was also keeping a close tabs on people in the paranormal field who were writing books on the subject and were actually getting hold of their books to determine what they believed about this. So, that demonstrates that regardless of what people feel about this anti-gravity levitation theory for pyramids, etc., we can now prove through the Freedom of Information Act that the government was very interested in that angle.
But these civilizations are global. I mean, a site is in Egypt and another is in a different continent. So,
well, yeah, I mean, that would kind of suggest. I mean, if it's true, if the legends aren't just legends, then it would suggest that thousands and thousands of years ago there was access, or maybe even like secret access, limited access to a technology which today we've either forgotten, lost, or we've relegated, to nothing more than folklore. The idea that, there's no way, you could move stones by directed energy or something like that. Now, I don't think, that there was a worldwide civilization 10,000 years ago like ours, with TVs, 747s, huge cities, because we would have found far more evidence. What I do think, though, is that there could have been cultures that developed in a highly advanced fashion, but in a different fashion, that wasn't so necessarily tied to our type of technology, but that could have been based into very different areas and possibly, this may have been one of them. And of course, if it didn't need, however it worked, we don't really know, but if it didn't employ the need for, vast machinery, then possibly there wouldn't be much evidence of it left other than sort of oral tradition that's been distorted, over the thousands of years. And I think maybe there are people in government that recognize, well, hey, this is an interesting area because these stories are coming from all around the world. They're all similar, about how these stones are moved.
Neil Kramer was on this show. He was talking about druids putting up a force field.
Well, again,
and much the same thing. It's frequency.
Yeah, and I mean, that's the interesting thing. When you read a lot of these stories, it's not like they're talking about bringing in some huge machine.
Never.
It's like they had access to something far more esoteric almost. People talk about mind power or possibly, sort of affecting the energy fields, in different ways that we don't really understand today. And that maybe sort of literal metallic machines or whatever may not have played a role in it. And possibly that would explain why today we're not able to find evidence, of the technology that was used. Well, if it wasn't technology in the way we understand it, that might explain, the lack of any evidence. All we've got are these huge stones, but we don't have the evidence, in some rusted old machine that, explains how it was built.
I had Anthony Sanchez on this show as well earlier in the season, and his work is about this Dolce, New Mexico, also known as Rio Arriba, the secret military base. So we know what his opinion is on the subject. What's yours?
Well, yeah, I mean, I've been to the Dolce area, and there's no doubt it's a very strange area. I mean, one of the things a lot of people don't know is that back in the 1970s, the FBI were heavily involved with the New Mexico State Police in investigating cattle mutilation incidents in and around the Dolce area. And the FBI have now declassified their files on all this, and they're actually online at their website, which is called The Vault. If you Google FBI plus Vault, it'll take you to the FBI's official website, which is called The Vault. And you can find the cattle mutilation files there and download them as PDFs. There's like 150 pages of really weird animal mutilations and black helicopter sightings all around Dolce. This is all reflected in the official FBI records, which are now in the public domain. On top of that, we know that back in the 60s, in that particular area, the government was involved with something called Project Gas Buggy. Project Gas Buggy was a program, ostensibly at least, designed to try and penetrate underground to get natural gas resources which could be used for energy. And a lot of this digging was done in the Dolce area. So, we know the government was digging underground in that very area back in the 60s because, again, these files have been declassified. But some people have suggested, well, maybe the gas buggy program was a cover for trying to determine if there was some sort of UFO base under there and destroy it. So, that in itself is intriguing when we find the FBI's investigating cattle mutilations there. We also find that the government was definitely digging underground in that particular area. And some of those areas have signs today warning people not to dig because they say, well, you could fall into one of these caverns where we were looking for the natural gas. But you could equally argue that's a cover to keep people away from a UFO base. So regardless of whatever the truth is.
The theory is that there's a maglev train that connects the base there at Dolce with the Los Alamos laboratory.
Yeah, I mean, the whole state of New Mexico is a hotbed of, secrets. I mean, you have in New Mexico, historically, you have Los Alamos, you have the New Mexico, the White Sands Proving Ground, now the White Sands Missile Range, where a lot of the early rocket research was undertaken from. So, it's an interesting, intriguing state that's been a hotbed of military activity for years. It's where the first atomic bomb was tested. So, it would make sense that if 3 or 4 secrets have been held there, there's going to be other stuff going on as well. And, what we can say for sure is that Dolce has been a hotbed of strange activity involving the government. Even the government's files, reflect that, like the cattle mute files, etc.
What are your thoughts on Project Bluebeam?
Bluebeam's an interesting one. I mean, I wrote a book a few years ago called Final Events, which looked at the idea of sort of creating charades like holograms in the sky, to try and convince people that something was going on that wasn't. Project Bluebeam, for people who aren't aware, is sort of this idea that, sort of to fake a second coming and, sort of put everybody under almost like a New World Order dominated religious control, if you like. There are different sort of strands to it. One that, the idea is to try and get the planet under like some fundamentalist control by faking a religious thing. Other people, sort of view it more literally, think it's done to sort of usher in the return of, or the surfacing of the Antichrist, and but there are different trends and themes. But it all basically revolves around sophisticated holograms type technology to fake a religious event and to influence public opinion. Now, one of the things we do know is that back in the early 60s, the CIA planned something very similar against Cuba. They were going to plan to project images of Jesus onto low-lying clouds over Cuba. This was just before the whole Bay of Pigs thing in the early 60s. They were planning to sort of project images of Jesus onto the clouds. They would have aircraft with specially modified aircraft with engines specially modified to keep the noise down, and they were going to broadcast voices and keep these aircraft sort of hidden in the clouds, kind of basically saying the United States has Jesus behind it, and you better give up the fight right now. And it never came to anything because back then it was perceived as being too risky, and they weren't sure the technology would work, so they dropped the idea. But that's 50 years ago. There was a plan to fake a religious event to try and affect the outcome of a potential confrontation with the enemy.
People are less religious now. I wonder if it would still work. Of course, if you saw Jesus in the sky, it might be fairly effective.
Well, I think, a lot of people are heavily religious. I mean, that's the one big difference I see, originally coming from Britain and living in the US, is that any US politician who runs for office is obliged to talk about their religious beliefs. In Britain, nobody could care less what the person believes or doesn't believe. All they want to know is, can you balance the budget? Can you get taxes down, lower crime, et cetera, et cetera. Nobody cares about whether the prime minister of the country believes in life after death and heaven or hell. But it's like over here, they have to exhibit a belief in God. And so, I think a lot of American people are heavily influenced by religion, in their everyday life. And nothing, I'm not complaining about that, but I think when you integrated something in your life, and a whole range of people do that, millions of people, it's very easy then to influence those people via that medium, if you like.
You wrote a book called The Real Men in Black. Are there really men in black?
Yes, there are. Yeah, I mean, a lot of people think, it's just Hollywood stuff, Will Smith and Tommy Lee Jones. But a lot of people don't realize that the movie was based on a comic book franchise of the same name. And the comic books were based on real-life reports of people who said that they'd had UFO encounters and had been visited by the Men in Black. But what I think happens is that, government agencies have sort of exploited this mystery. And if there's a significant UFO event they want to remain hidden, they don't turn up on the doorstep in sort of uniform and, hi, I'm Major General so-and-so from the nearest space. They want to shut the person up, and they want to make them look stupid if they talk about it. So they deliberately kind of go over the top and dress and act in an odd fashion and let people think it's the Men in Black. And then if the person talks about it, they're going to get laughed at. It's like, you've been watching too many Hollywood films, you want to take a break. And so, in other words, part of it at least is sort of like a created cover to allow the government to threaten and silence people, but in a fashion that nobody will believe it if the person mentions it to anyone.
Well, let's take our final break, Nick, and
okay.
We'll talk about more things after the break.
All right.
episode of The West Coast Truth with Russell Scott.
Listen, when you're blackmailing the complete financial structure of the earth, how is that not crimes against humanity?
Well,
that's up there with anything that anyone has ever done.
Well, you have to understand, and it's not just you. One reason I went to the Congo, just so you know, is that I insisted. I told BBC. They said, well, you can do this story without going to the Congo. I said, no, I want people to see the faces of the victims, color of victims. Singer was taking money that was earmarked to clean up the water systems to end a cholera epidemic in the Congo. I wanted people to meet the cholera victims. So when we talk about crimes against humanity, I wanted you to meet the humans who are the victims of the crime. You know, one thing I've said is that there's no such thing as a victimless billionaire. Yes, it's a crime, and I want you. That's why I want you to go, read Vulture's Picnic, read Billionaires and Ballot Bands, because you got to meet not only who these characters are and how they make their money. I'm tired of just talking about the 1%. You know their names: Paul the Vulture Singer, John Paulson, Iceman Sim.
The West Coast Truth with Russell Scott, Season 4.
Tired of being told no? Tired of being told no smoking? Who wouldn't like a little freedom today? Want to smoke anywhere? I mean, anywhere? Then get SmokeBot. No smoke, no smell, no unpleasant aftertaste. SmokeBot equals freedom. The original SmokeBot allows you the most realistic experience, but is a much healthier alternative to smoking tobacco, and at about half the cost. SmokeBot lets you smoke on the go because the premium kit comes with an on-the-go charger pack. Or charge your SmokeBot in the car. You can even charge with your computer. Very convenient. SmokeBot smokes are equal to about a pack of cigarettes at a fraction of the cost. Ask for SmokeBot at your local retailer or order online at www.thesmokebot.com. A lot more freedom. If you do smoke, SmokeBot. SmokeBot does not sell to anyone under 18. You should not smoke if you are nursing or pregnant. You should check with your doctor to see if a nicotine alternative is right for you.
World Banking World Fraud, a must-read for anyone with a bank account. From a struggling young life as an orphan to a corporate nightmare of fraud, John Cruz in his new book describes his exceptional rise in the banking world and documents the systematic fraud and money laundering he uncovers while inside. What is really done with your identity? World Banking World Fraud, available now at Amazon.com. Learn the truth.
Take it back. Do-do-do-do. Take it back. Yeah, 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 yeah. Take it back. Do-do-do-do. Take it back.
We're back with Nick Redfern. Now, Nick, you don't just write paranormal books, as you said earlier. You also write articles, and you write for Penthouse.
Yeah.
No, you're not. It's no secret that you write for Penthouse. You're a pervert, and you write sex stories.
Yeah, I mean, when you're a journalist, you go where the work is. Same way as if you're an electrician. You don't just do the jobs you want to do. You've got bills to pay and whatever. And if there's work and somebody wants you to do some electricity work around the house for them, you go and do that. That's the same with me. And I do quite a bit of writing for Penthouse. Most of it is kind of themed around the paranormal. For example, I did sort of a full-length feature, I think about a year ago, called Sex and the Supernatural. And it was basically like a study of people who claimed sexual encounters with everything from like ghosts to aliens, kind of in the alien abduction scenario.
For a second, I thought you said goats.
No, that probably would have been a good one as well to do, though. But
a different article. Okay.
No, ghosts. And also, with the ghost angle, it was kind of, with the stories of like incubus and succubus type encounters. And the alien angle touched more upon things like alien abductions and the sexual components of that.
Listen, I'm not even going to pretend. What is incubus? What is that?
Oh, well, incubus it's basically like an old phenomenon where people will go to bed at night, and in the middle of the night they'll sort of semi-wake up but feel paralyzed, and they'll feel this threatening presence in the room, but they're unable to move. And sometimes this entity, if you like. He's like a predatory sexual entity where, a woman will have felt almost like raped by some sort of supernatural entity where she's unable to move. And, there are parallels between these sort of cases and modern-day alien abductions. Throughout history, you can find cases of, they become known as like night terrors, where, as I said, that is the scenario. Somebody goes to bed, they have sort of a weird semi-awake dream, and there's like a sense of an evil presence in the room coming towards them, and there's nothing they can do about it. And often it does end in like a sexual component. So, I've done stuff like that for Penthouse, and the most recent one I did for them was on a brothel opening, a cat house opening in Nevada, which was all going to be UFO and Area 51 themed because it was in Nevada, and which is kind of, I guess, I get a new and novel way of getting customers through the door. So, so I do a lot for them like that, and the one I did before that wasn't paranormal, but it was all about the rise in the whole Mile High Club angle. There are people nowadays who own little aircraft, and they're hiring their aircraft out, and they convert the back part of the aircraft with a bed and curtains and make it a nice little cozy atmosphere. They'll take you up to a mile in the sky, so you and your
have a shag
wife
at
husband
10,000 feet. Yeah.
yeah, you get to join officially. I mean, literally officially join the Mile High Club. There's, it's really it's a booming business.
So, are you a card-carrying member? Or?
No, I'm not. No, I mean, my flying's sort of limited to airliners, and you know what they're like today. You can't even move out your seat without getting tased.
Right. I can't imagine why anybody would want to join that club anyway.
Well, I guess it's to say,
I can only assume the bathroom is where you do it, and it's not. Yeah, so you could say. Yeah.
Yeah. I've done it. And it's certainly not everyone who can say they've done it. But I guess it does impress people. It would impress me if somebody said they'd done it.
Right. Well, I'm just going to say I've done it and not do it.
Yeah. Well, actually, you can buy T-shirts even now. Some companies saying, I entered the Mile High Club, that sort of thing. Even buy certificates, fake certificates that saying you actually achieved it. At whatever 1,000 feet a mile is.
You even talk about Nibiru in your book. Geez, you're really up to date with everything, and that kind of ties into this 2012 thing.
Yeah.
Which is kind of around the corner. How do you feel about that?
Well, I mean, that's an interesting
and tie
angle.
that into Nibiru, because there are a lot of people out there that are totally paranoid about this situation.
Yeah, well, Nibiru supposedly is this ancient planet in our solar system that has such a huge orbit that it only comes close to us, once in an extraordinarily, massively long time. And supposedly, it's going to be coming through past the Earth, and it's going to cause all sort of cataclysmic changes around December 2012. Well, the problem with that, I have the big problem, and I don't see it as anything but a problem that cannot be resolved, is that it's only 6 months away. We should have already seen it ages ago. The sheer size of the solar system, the distance from the Earth to the outer planets. If that planet existed and is going to be with us in 6 months, well, where is it? That's the thing. It sure as hell isn't turning up on telescopes. And if somebody was to say, oh, well, that's because all the NASA telescopes are being shut down or they're not being allowed to talk about it. Right. Well, anyone can go and buy a telescope that can see the planets, every planet in the solar system. You just buy them in a store. They're really powerful today. And yet nobody can see this planet. So that, to me, suggests it's not there. So I don't think people have to worry about a gigantic planet coming past the Earth and affecting gravitational pulls.
No, it's just
and all
cloaked.
No, yeah, I totally forgot that. I totally forgot about that. But, the bigger angle of, is anything going to happen on December the 21st, 2012?
Yeah.
Well, contrary to a lot of people think, the Mayan prophecies never said anything about the world ending or, gigantic tidal waves or comets.
I had an argument with somebody about this the other day, and they said, hey, no, they say that's when time ends. And I said, no, it's the end of the calendar.
What it actually says,
okay.
Now, the Mayans actually believe the Earth or human civilization came in cycles, and these cycles one would end and another one would start. Now, it's that emotive word of cycle that has led some people to believe or interpret it to mean the end of the world, or that in December 95% of the population is going to be wiped out and the rest will have to start again. Other people think it's just going to be like a spiritual mind shift rather than a physical planetary-wide disaster. You know, maybe there'll be a different appreciation on the world for some reason, or maybe nothing will happen. The reason being that we do know that over the years there have been examples where the length of the year has been misperceived to the point where, you know, certain cultures didn't always use like a 365-day year. So we don't even know properly, you know, if December the 21st, 2012 is the year. And of course, the other big thing I would say is, you look at every prophecy in history, Nostradamus, 1999, didn't come true. You know, everybody remembers when December, you know, 1999 was going to spin over to 2000 and all our electric was going to go off because the computers ran on different systems and the world was going to come to a halt. That never happened. You know, why didn't prophets prophesize the internet? 9/11, you know, biggest event of the last in modern history. You know, it's kind of like, I don't say that people haven't had weird experiences where they've had prophetic dreams and things like that, but these bigger disasters just never seem to happen. You know, it's almost like it's an inbuilt thing to expect the apocalypse or whatever. And, you know,
but if nothing happens on December 21st, it'll be the death of a huge industry.
Well, it will. I mean, the most important thing is
what happens to all these? What happens to all these Mayan researchers that have been trumping this 2012 thing for years?
Well, they go on to research something else in another prophecy, which doesn't happen for another 100 years. They can write about that, safe in the knowledge that they'll never be able to be proved wrong because it's too far in the future. You know, that's the big issue with the 2012 thing. There are all these books out, and it's only 6 months away. You know, people could take a massive tumble in terms of credibility. The ones who won't are the people like Marie Jones, who wrote a book called 2013, which is a very balanced study of what if something happens, but what if nothing happens? You know, Marie is one of the few people in the field who is going to come out of it all right. A lot of people who say it's world's end and we better prepare and dig bunkers. Well, if they're right, well, fair enough, but if they're wrong, they're going to look very, very stupid, you know.
You named her name. Who would look stupid?
No, who would look stupid? Well, I mean, there are literally dozens. I mean, I couldn't tell you the authors. I mean, the reason Marie sticks in my mind was because I thought her book was the best one, because it was so balanced and took the view that, well, there's a phenomenon, but does that mean anything's going to happen, or does it mean nothing's going to happen? I mean, I actually haven't read that many books, but I mean, there's dozens out there. You know, you just type 2013 into Amazon, you'll find dozens. And to say that, you know, this or that's going to happen, and it's only 6 months away, you know, is, well, actually, no, it's less than 6 months away now. You know, you could end up with major egg on your face, and I don't know what these people will do. You know, are they going to apologize? Are they going to just ignore it all and start on something else, or are they going to say, hey, we got it wrong? You know, that would be the best thing to do. At least you salvage something from it.
You know, everybody meets and decides on the new day.
Yeah.
You know, okay, guys, it's 2040. You know, it can't be too far down the road.
That's actually, that's one of the things that Marie points out as well, is that, you know, we can never be sure of a specific date. You know, it's kind of like when people talk about Jesus being born 2,000 years ago. Well, you know, that if you think about it, it was December, supposedly, when he was born. Well, you go back, you know, and the shepherds are out in the field. A lot of people don't realize this, that, you know, the Bethlehem at midnight in December, the farmers don't have their farm animals out. It's too cold. You know, it's kind of like there are clear examples as to why we should be very, very wary of taking things literally just because somebody says it or it happens to be written down. You know, and that's the problem with the 2012 thing. People have interpreted the dates literally. They've interpreted the word cycle to mean the end, you know. A cycle's a cycle. A cycle doesn't mean a comet's going to run into the planet. You know, that's an interpretation based on the fact that so many people are obsessed with disaster and apocalypse. You know, like these survivalist types who got bunkers full of guns. You know, they think zombies are going to rise up, or there's going to be a catastrophic flu all across the world, or there's going to be, you know, whatever's going to happen. Well, a lot of people didn't think like that 15 years ago. A lot of it's has surfaced, like millennia hysteria has surfaced in the last 10 years, where every TV show you put on certain channels, 10 ways to destroy the earth, all this sort of stuff, you know. We're all going to die from, you know, people are obsessed with viruses today, you know, flu viruses, this virus, that virus, you know, and it's just, people have become sort of ingrained with this belief that didn't exist 10 years ago, 20 years ago, you know. People just got on and enjoyed their lives. They didn't worry about whether some meteorite was going to come down and have an alien virus on board that was going to kill everybody or whatever.
Well, we're living in the age of catastrophe. And
no, we're living in the age of belief that catastrophes are coming, I would say.
Well, sure.
Yeah, but why have people been put into that mindset? That's the thing.
Well, you know, with the internet, if you want to be noticed, you have to say something fairly interesting. And the end of the world is, you know, it gets people's attention.
Well, it does, but I mean, you know, it's kind of a shame that, you know, so many people are obsessed, you know, by the end of the world. You know, it's like, why not just enjoy life? You know, I don't worry about the world ending because all I see is that what's happened is that more advertising and profile has been given to how and why the world could end. But none of the scenarios have happened. It doesn't mean they won't, but, you know, they haven't happened. So, you know, it's kind of like what's changed is, you know, we know historically this happened from the changeover at the end of the 9th century to, you know, the start of the 10th century, you know, like, with the millennia, if you like, that there was a belief back then that the world was going to end and the gods were going to come back and punish everybody. It didn't happen. You know, we're going through the same, or a lot of people are going through the same thing today. You know, it's, I mean, I'm sure everybody remembers, you know, the bird flu thing. Bird flu, if you'd listened to some people a few years ago, you know, the population was going to be down to like 500,000 in a year because everybody was going to die. You know, well, I never had an inoculation against it. And there are people saying, no, you've got to go and get your shot. I'm not having a shot just because a bunch of crazy people are saying it's the end of the world. You know, that's just ridiculous.
Well, they're just advertising for the pharmaceutical industry that's prepared to sell you the vaccine.
Yeah, I mean, I mean, don't get me wrong, there are reasons why governments want us living in fear. And that does come into play. Yeah. But people only live in fear because they accept what they're told. You know, question it.
They want you living in fear in your house, on the internet, watching television, watching advertising, and buying their products with credit cards.
Yeah, I mean, that's sort of one of the things that I see a big difference, like when I go back to England, is that, you know, that everybody chats with the neighbours. I've noticed here, and again, it's not meant to be disrespectful, it's just noticing the difference between two nations, is that when people open the front door, I've seen people, if the neighbour's there, they kind of look the other way. They don't talk to them anymore. And I've never really understood that, but it does go along with that kind of angle of, you know, keeping people indoors, dumbing down, controlling them, not wanting the good old days of, you know, it's like, you know, seeing kids riding around town on the bikes. They can't ride around town on the bike because they're too fat and diabetic, you know.
Well, one thing I have to say I really like about your work is, you know, you don't have a personal agenda. You know, you're just finding information and sharing it as a real journalist right?
Yeah, I don't feel a need to hammer home the idea that UFOs are extraterrestrial. You know, as I pointed out earlier, I don't know. I truthfully cannot say what percentage are or aren't versus what could be military craft. You know, I'm not here to preach to people. I'm here to share information because if we're honest with ourselves, we've got a lot of data, but we don't have a great deal of definitive answers. But there are people who will tell you they have got the answers, but they haven't. They've got a belief system, and they equate belief being proof. Belief in something isn't the same as having proof in it. It's basically having belief in it. And I don't like to work on belief. I like to go with fact.
We're into some overtime here, Nick, but you know, I was really a big fan of Whitley Strieber's work and The Face on Mars, and watched those stories unfold. You know, what was that, 15 years ago now? That's a big part of your book, and the Pyramid of Mars and the Face of Mars. Tell me about that. And are Earthlings just Martians?
Well, yeah, I mean, there's a lot of weird areas and interesting implications with the whole Mars story. You know, I'm sure everybody is aware of the so-called face on Mars. It was photographed by NASA in 1976, and it looks like a huge sphinx-like face staring up from the surface. Now, NASA, contrary to a lot of people think, you know, they have no problem talking about the face on Mars. They've got a whole section about it on their website. But their public view, at least, is that it's kind of like the equivalent of people seeing faces in clouds. They say that, you know, when you've got this huge mesa, as they believe it to be, and when the shadows and the sun is in the right direction overhead, it makes it look like a face. And then when the shadows are in the wrong place and the sun's in the wrong place, it just looks like a mountain or a hill, you know. But what's interesting is that a lot of research has been done suggesting sort of linear carvings, if you like, you know, that are actually in some sort of design. And the area where the face can be found, which is called Cydonia, is also the site of a number of formations which look very, very pyramid-like. You know, they don't look just like, you know, natural formations. They look like pyramids. So this has sort of given rise to the idea that although Mars is pretty much perceived as being a dead planet today, maybe, you know, who knows, 1 million years ago, 500,000 years ago, 100,000 years ago, perhaps that wasn't the case. Perhaps there were some sort of civilization there. Now, when I say it's sort of perceived as being pretty much dead today, some people think it actually isn't. I mean, if you go on the internet and go to Google Images and type in Mars plus banyan tree, B-A-N-Y-A-N, you'll see images of these weird-looking things on Mars that look like some sort of alien tree. How you would imagine, you know, a tree on another planet would look. They look like whole orchards, if you like, or fields of these strange-looking tree-type structures. So some researchers don't believe Mars is quite as dead as perhaps NASA would have us believe or accept. But what's interesting is that because you have this sphinx-like face and these pyramid-type structures, this has given rise to the theory that, well, that's too coincidental in terms of the similarity between the Sphinx of Egypt and the pyramids of Egypt. So it's given rise to the idea that perhaps, granted it's a theory, but, you know, a number of researchers have suggested that if Mars once was a viable world and its atmosphere began to degrade and, you know, the indigenous Martians knew this and they had time to prepare and they realized that, you know, the planet was going to spiral into destruction in terms of its atmosphere, maybe they made a final emergency last-ditch effort to leave the planet. If they realized, you know, through technology that our world had a viable atmosphere, maybe they came here. And maybe, you know, wanting to preserve a bit of their heritage, they taught the more primitive humans certain things about architecture and incorporated their own architecture, you know, pyramids and sphinxes. Now, some people might laugh at that or roll their eyes, but the fact is, a lot of these early cultures on Earth didn't gradually develop. It was like they sprung up out of nowhere. You know, for example, in South America, the Incas, the Mayas, you know, we see evidence of amazing structures. The same in Egypt. What we see less of is, you know, kind of like the slow plodding advance of these cultures to really extraordinary levels. It was like they suddenly surfaced out of nowhere, which, if they'd got help, that may actually, you know, explain that conundrum. And, you know, and that is a conundrum.
Nick, where can my audience find out more about you?
They can reach me at nickredfernsbooks.blogspot.com or Nick Redfern, Fortean, Fortean, blogspot.com, or just type me into Facebook and contact me that way.
On my website, westcoasttruth.com, your book is on the West Coast Truth Book Club. Click on that image. It'll take you to the Amazon page, and you can purchase the book. I'm talking to the audience, not you, Nick.
Well, thanks anyway, Russell. Thank you.
So I have my copy in my hand. I think it's a great book. You know, it's filled with information. It's extremely readable, entertaining. Pick it up, buy it. Nick Redfern, thank you so much for being a guest on the program.
Well, thanks a lot, Russell. Thank you.
All right, and thank you for being on the West Coast Truth.